Welcome back to Hold On, Survival Stories, where we explore the most extraordinary tales of human endurance, courage, and the unbreakable will to survive against impossible odds. I'm your host, and today's story will take you high into the unforgiving mountains of Alaska, where survival means battling not just the elements, but time itself. Imagine this. You're aboard a small aircraft flying over the Alaskan wilderness when suddenly everything goes wrong. The engine fails, the plane spirals out of control, and you crash into a remote mountain valley 200 miles from the nearest town. The pilot is dead, 2 passengers are critically injured, and you're stranded in sub-zero temperatures with a blizzard approaching. How long could you survive? How long before hypothermia claims the injured? How long before search teams give up looking for you in millions of acres of trackless wilderness? How long before the choice becomes clear? Someone must make an impossible journey through the frozen mountains to find help, or everyone dies. This is the true story of Captain Lisa Zhang, a 34-year-old emergency room doctor from Anchorage, who on February 8, 2023, boarded a charter flight that should have been a routine medical transport. Instead, she found herself leading a desperate fight for survival in the Alaskan wilderness, where she would have to choose between staying with critically injured patients or abandoning them to seek rescue in one of the most hostile environments on Earth. Lisa's story isn't just about surviving a plane crash. It's about the impossible decisions that survival sometimes demands. It's about a doctor's oath to do no harm colliding with the brutal reality that sometimes helping means leaving people behind. It's about what happens when your medical training tells you that patients will die without immediate help, but your survival instincts tell you that going for help means certain death. But most importantly, it's about what it means to hold on when holding on requires you to make choices that go against everything you believe about right and wrong, about loyalty and abandonment, about what it means to be human. Captain Lisa Zhang had been practicing emergency medicine in Alaska for 8 years. She understood the unique challenges of providing medical care in a state where patients might be hundreds of miles from the nearest hospital, where weather could ground rescue aircraft for days, and where survival often depended more on wilderness skills than medical technology. Lisa was also an experienced mountaineer and wilderness enthusiast. She had climbed Denali twice, completed numerous backcountry expeditions, and had extensive training in wilderness medicine. She understood the dangers of the Alaskan environment better than most people who lived there, which makes what happened to her all the more terrifying. Because if someone with Lisa's medical expertise and wilderness experience could find herself trapped in a life-or-death survival situation, it proves that Alaska's wilderness shows mercy to no one. February 8, 2023, started as a routine medical transport mission. Lisa was flying with pilot Jake Morrison and 2 patients, Maria Santos, a 45-year-old woman with severe internal injuries from a snowmobile accident, and Tom Bradley, a 52-year-old man suffering from a heart attack from the remote village of Coldfoot to the trauma center in Anchorage. The flight should have taken 3 hours in good weather. The forecast showed clear skies and light winds, perfect conditions for the 400-mile journey across some of Alaska's most remote wilderness. The aircraft, a twin-engine Piper Navajo, was well maintained and equipped for medical transport, with life support equipment and supplies for both patients. Weather looks good all the way to Anchorage, pilot Jake Morrison reported as they prepared for takeoff. Flight time approximately 2 hours and 45 minutes. Should be a smooth ride. Lisa was monitoring both patients during the flight, managing their medical needs, while keeping watch on the increasingly dramatic landscape passing below. The Alaskan wilderness stretched endlessly, in every direction snow-covered mountains, frozen rivers, and millions of acres of forest, broken only by the occasional village or mining camp. Both patients, stable Lisa reported to Anchorage Medical Center via radio at their 1-hour checkpoint. Ida still on schedule. Maria's vitals improving. Tom responding well to medication. But Alaska's weather can change with deadly speed, and what had been a clear morning was rapidly deteriorating into something far more dangerous. A storm system moving faster than predicted was bringing high winds, heavy snow, and visibility that dropped from unlimited to near zero in minutes. Anchorage Control, this is medical transport. November 7-4 Alpha, Jake radioed, as he struggled to maintain control in increasingly turbulent air, requesting immediate clearance to alternate destination. Weather deteriorating rapidly. The response was not what they wanted to hear. November 7-4 Alpha, all airports in your area are now below minimums. Recommend you turn back to Coldfoot immediately. But turning back was no longer an option. The storm had closed in behind them as well, and fuel calculations showed they couldn't reach any suitable landing site. Jake was facing every pilot's worst nightmare, being trapped between weather systems with no safe options and passengers whose lives depended on his decisions. I'm going to try to get through the pass, Jake announced to Lisa, though his voice carried the strain of someone making a desperate gamble. If we can get to the other side of the mountains, we might be able to find a place to set down. Lisa understood the implications. Jake was attempting to fly through a mountain pass in deteriorating weather with critically ill patients aboard. It was the kind of decision that pilots hope they never have to make, risking everyone's life for a chance to save everyone's life. The Piper Navajo entered the mountain pass just as the storm reached its full fury. Winds exceeding 60 mph buffeted the small aircraft like a taunt, while snow and ice reduced visibility to zero. Jake was flying entirely by instruments, navigating by radar through terrain that could kill them instantly if he made even a small error. At 2:15 p.m., while fighting to maintain control in severe turbulence, Jake Morrison heard the sound that every pilot dreads, the sudden silence of engine failure. The left engine had ingested ice and flamed out, leaving them with only one engine in conditions that challenged even fully powered aircraft. Mayday, 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 Jake radioed, though he wasn't sure anyone could hear him through the storm. Medical transport, November 7-4 Alpha declaring emergency. Engine failure in severe weather, attempting forced landing. Lisa felt the aircraft shudder and begin losing altitude. She looked out the window and saw nothing but swirling snow and the dark shadows of mountains that seemed to be reaching up toward them like grasping fingers. Jake, what's happening? Lisa called forward to the cockpit. Lost the left engine, Jake replied, his voice tight with concentration. Looking for a place to put her down. Make sure your patients are secure. Lisa quickly checked Maria and Tom's restraints and medical equipment, knowing that whatever was about to happen would test every piece of gear aboard the aircraft. Both patients were unconscious from their medical conditions and pain medication, unaware that their medical transport had become a fight for survival. Through the cockpit window, Lisa caught a glimpse of what appeared to be a small clearing in the forest below, barely large enough for an aircraft, surrounded by trees that could tear the plane apart if Jake missed his approach by even a few feet. "There," Jake said, pointing toward the clearing. "That's our only chance." At 2:32 p.m. on February 8, 2023, medical transport, November 7-4 Alpha crashed into the Alaskan wilderness during a blizzard, 200 miles from the nearest town, with 4 people aboard and rescue impossible until the storm passed. But 3 of those people were still alive, and Captain Lisa Zhang was about to face the most challenging medical emergency of her career, one where the patient was survival itself, and the prescription was decisions that no doctor should ever have to make. The crash happened in slow motion, and in an instant simultaneously, Lisa felt the aircraft drop suddenly, as Jake fought to maintain control with only one engine. Then the bone-jarring impact as the landing gear caught the tops of pine trees at the edge of the clearing. The Piper Navajo cartwheeled through the forest, shedding parts and fuel as it tore through branches and struck trees that exploded into splinters. Lisa's last clear memory before impact was the sound of metal tearing and Jake Morrison shouting something she couldn't understand over the noise of destruction. Then everything went black as the aircraft came to rest against a massive pine tree. Its fuselage cracked open, and its wings folded back like broken arms. When Lisa regained consciousness, she was hanging upside down in her restraints, blood dripping from a head wound onto the inverted ceiling of the aircraft. The cabin was filled with the acrid smell of aviation fuel and the ominous creaking of metal under stress. Outside, she could hear the howling wind of the blizzard that had caused their crash. Jake Lisa called toward the cockpit, though her voice was weak and her head was pounding. "Jake, are you okay?" There was no response from the pilot's seat. Lisa struggled to release her restraints and dropped down to what was now the ceiling of the inverted aircraft. When she reached the cockpit, she found Jake Morrison unconscious and bleeding, but alive. The impact had thrown him against the instrument panel, and he had suffered what appeared to be serious head trauma. Lisa's medical training took over, despite her own injuries and confusion. She quickly checked Jake's vital signs and found a weak but steady pulse. He had sustained a severe concussion and possible skull fracture, but he was breathing normally, and his pupils were reactive. He was alive, but he would need immediate medical attention to survive. "Maria," Lisa called back toward the passenger area, dreading what she might find. Maria Santos, the snowmobile accident victim, was unconscious but breathing. The crash had worsened her internal injuries, and Lisa could see signs of internal bleeding that would be fatal without surgical intervention. Tom Bradley, the heart attack patient, was awake but in severe pain. The trauma of the crash had triggered another cardiac episode, and his condition was deteriorating rapidly. Lisa quickly assessed her own injuries: a head wound that would need stitches, several bruised ribs, and a sprained wrist. Painful but not life-threatening. She was the only person in the crashed aircraft who was conscious and able to function, which made her responsible for everyone's survival. "Okay, Lisa," she said aloud, using the sound of her own voice to maintain focus and calm. 3 patients, all critical. Crashed aircraft in blizzard conditions. No immediate rescue possible. Think like a doctor. Prioritize and treat. Lisa's first priority was establishing the medical condition of each crash victim and providing immediate treatment with whatever supplies were available. The aircraft's medical equipment had been thrown around during the crash, but most of it appeared to be intact and functional. Jake Morrison, severe head trauma, possible skull fracture, unconscious but stable vital sign. Treatment: monitor closely, keep warm, prevent further injury. Maria Santos, internal bleeding, worsened by crash impact, unconscious, condition deteriorating. Treatment: Roman 4 fluids, pain management, monitor for shock, requires surgical intervention, not available in field conditions. Tom Bradley, second heart attack triggered by crash trauma, conscious but severe chest pain. Treatment: cardiac medications, oxygen if available, minimize stress and activity. Lisa's medical assessment was sobering. Maria needed surgery within hours, or she would die from internal bleeding. Tom needed cardiac intervention. That was impossible in wilderness conditions. Jake might recover from his head injury with time and care, but he could also develop life-threatening complications. All 3 patients needed immediate evacuation to a trauma center, but Lisa knew that rescue was impossible until the blizzard passed. Weather reports before the crash had predicted the storm would last at least 48 hours, possibly longer. "We're on our own for at least 2 days," Lisa said as she worked to stabilize her patients. "Maybe longer if search and rescue can't locate the crash site immediately." Lisa's next priority was assessing their survival situation. The aircraft had crashed in a small clearing, surrounded by dense forest, approximately 200 miles from Anchorage, and at least 50 miles from the nearest village. The fuselage was cracked, but still provided some shelter from the elements. Most importantly, the aircraft's emergency locator beacon appeared to be functioning, though whether its signal could penetrate the storm was uncertain. The crash had occurred at approximately 3,000 feet elevation, in mountainous terrain. Outside temperatures were well below zero, and the blizzard was depositing snow at rates that would make travel impossible even for experienced mountaineers. The aircraft's heating system was damaged, but the cabin retained some heat and provided protection from the wind. Shelter is adequate for now, Lisa assessed, as she worked to treat her patients. Food and water supplies limited to what was aboard the aircraft. Medical supplies good for several days, if rationed carefully. Major concern is heating and long-term shelter, if rescue is delayed. Lisa spent the next several hours doing everything possible to stabilize her patient's condition and improve their survival situation. She moved the most severely injured Maria Santos to the warmest part of the cabin and set up Roman 4 fluids to treat her internal bleeding. She administered cardiac medications to Tom Bradley and monitored his heart rhythm using portable equipment from the medical kit. But Lisa was fighting a losing battle, and she knew it. Maria's internal bleeding was getting worse, despite Roman 4 fluid replacement. Tom's cardiac condition was unstable and could deteriorate rapidly without definitive medical intervention. Jake remained unconscious, and his head injury could prove fatal if complications develop. "I'm losing them," Lisa admitted to herself, as she checked vital signs after 6 hours of intensive care. Maria won't survive another 12 hours without surgery. Tom needs cardiac catheterization. Jake needs a neurosurgeon. I can keep them alive temporarily, but I can't provide the treatment they need. As night fell, and the blizzard continued to rage outside the crashed aircraft, Lisa faced the most difficult decision of her medical career. She could stay with her patients and provide palliative care as they slowly died from injuries she couldn't treat, or she could leave them in the aircraft and attempt to reach help, knowing that they would almost certainly die while she was gone, but also knowing that staying meant everyone would die when their supplies ran out. The Hippocratic Oath says do no harm, Lisa said aloud, as she sat in the darkness, listening to the labored breathing of her patients. But what does that mean when any choice causes harm? Lisa was about to make a decision that would define the rest of her life, assuming she survived the next 72 hours. She was about to choose between the certainty of slow death and the possibility of rescue, between loyalty to her patients and responsibility to seek help, between doing what felt right and doing what might actually save lives. Outside the crashed aircraft, the Alaskan wilderness waited with the patient indifference of a predator that knows its prey has nowhere to run. Hour 18. Lisa had been monitoring her patients through the night, fighting to keep them stable as their conditions deteriorated. Maria Santos's internal bleeding was worsening, despite everything Lisa could do with limited supplies. Tom Bradley had suffered another cardiac episode during the night and was showing signs of heart failure. Jake Morrison remained unconscious with possible brain swelling that could prove fatal. The blizzard had intensified rather than diminished, with winds howling outside the aircraft at speeds that made any thought of travel suicidal. Snow had drifted against the fuselage, providing additional insulation, but also making the aircraft harder to spot from above when search operations could begin. Lisa had been using her satellite phone to attempt contact with emergency services, but the storm was blocking satellite signals, and her calls weren't getting through. The aircraft's emergency locator beacon was transmitting, but there was no way to know if anyone was receiving the signal or able to respond during the blizzard. Still no communication with outside Lisa, noted in the medical log she was keeping. Weather conditions preventing any rescue attempts. Patient conditions continuing to deteriorate despite aggressive treatment. Lisa's assessment of her patient's conditions was grim. Maria Santos, blood pressure dropping, signs of severe internal bleeding, responsive to pain but unconscious, without surgical intervention, probably 12-24 hours to live. Tom Bradley, chest pain increasing, irregular heart rhythm, shortness of breath, cardiac medications keeping him stable, but condition deteriorating, high risk of fatal arrhythmia or cardiac arrest. Jake Morrison, still unconscious, pupils beginning to show signs of increased intracranial pressure, possible brain swelling that could cause death within hours if untreated. They're all dying, Lisa whispered to herself as she checked vital signs in the dim light of her medical equipment. I can slow it down, but I can't stop it. They need treatments I can't provide. Lisa faced a medical and ethical dilemma that no amount of training had prepared her for. As a doctor, her oath was to first do no harm, but in their current situation, any action she took or failed to take would cause harm. If she stayed with her patients, she could provide comfort care as they died from injuries that were treatable in a hospital, but fatal in the wilderness. She could ensure they weren't alone when they died, but she couldn't save them. If she left to seek help, her patients would die while she was gone, but her journey might lead to rescue for herself and recovery of their bodies for their families. It was a choice between certain death for everyone and possible survival for at least one person. "What would you want me to do?" Lisa asked her unconscious patients, though she knew they couldn't answer. "Would you want me to stay and die with you, or try to get help even though it might be too late?" Lisa's decision was complicated by her assessment of her own survival chances. If she attempted to reach help, the nearest known habitation was a mining camp, approximately 25 miles away through mountainous terrain in blizzard conditions. The journey would require her to navigate by compass through a whiteout, climb over mountain passes in sub-zero temperatures, and survive for possibly several days with minimal supplies. Survival probability for solo winter travel in current conditions: less than 50%. Lisa calculated with the same clinical objectivity she used for medical diagnosis. But survival probability for all four of us if I stay: essentially zero. Lisa spent the remaining hours of darkness preparing for a decision she hoped she wouldn't have to make. She organized the medical supplies to provide maximum benefit for her patients if she had to leave them. She prepared survival gear for herself in case the weather improved enough to make travel possible. Most importantly, she tried to determine if there were any alternatives to abandoning her patients. Radio beacon still transmitting, Lisa noted as she checked the aircraft's emergency equipment. Satellite phone still blocked by weather. Aircraft visible from air if search aircraft can fly, but storm conditions preventing air operation. Lisa also considered the possibility of moving her patients to a more defensible shelter and attempting group survival until rescue arrived. But Maria and Jake were too critically injured to move, and Tom's cardiac condition made any physical stress potentially fatal. Group travel impossible, Lisa concluded. Attempting to move patients would probably kill them faster than leaving them in aircraft. As dawn approached on February 9, the blizzard showed no signs of diminishing. If anything, the weather was getting worse, with wind speeds increasing and visibility dropping to near zero. Lisa's weather radio was picking up forecasts, predicting the storm would continue for another 24-48 hours. "Decision point approaching," Lisa said aloud, using verbal communication to maintain focus and clarity. "Current weather makes travel impossible, but if conditions improve, I'll have to choose between staying and going." Lisa's military medical training had included scenarios involving triage decisions, choosing which patients to treat when resources were insufficient to treat everyone. But those exercises had never included the possibility of abandoning patients to save other patients. The ethical framework she had learned simply didn't address her current situation. In military triage, you treat the patients most likely to survive, Lisa reminded herself. But this isn't triage. This is choosing between trying to save someone and letting everyone die. At 8:00 a.m. on February 9, the wind suddenly dropped, and the snow decreased from blizzard conditions to moderate snowfall. For the first time since the crash, visibility improved enough that Lisa could see the forest around the aircraft. The improvement might be temporary, but it was the first opportunity for travel since their crash. Weather window opening, Lisa observed, studying the conditions outside. Wind speed decreased, visibility improving. Possible travel opportunity. Lisa made her decision with the same systematic approach she used for medical procedure. She would leave her patients in the aircraft with enough medical supplies to keep them comfortable and attempt to reach help before their conditions became irreversible. It was a calculated risk based on medical assessment and survival probability. "I can't save you by staying," Lisa told her unconscious patients as she prepared to leave, "but I might be able to save you by going. I promise I'll come back with help." Lisa's preparations for solo travel in the Alaskan wilderness were methodical and thorough. She took only essential survival gear to minimize weight, while ensuring she had everything needed for several days of winter travel. Her load included shelter, emergency bivouac, sleeping bag rated to -20 degrees F, navigation, compass, GPS, detailed maps, food, high-energy bars for 5 days, water, bottles plus purification tablets, fire, waterproof matches, lighter, fire starter, medical, basic first aid, personal medications, communication, satellite phone, emergency radio, signaling, flares, signal mirror, whistle. Total pack weight approximately 35 pounds, Lisa calculated. Heavy for solo winter travel, but necessary for survival if weather deteriorates. Lisa's route to the mining camp would take her northeast through a mountain pass, down into a valley system, and then up another ridge to reach the camp. The total distance was approximately 25 miles, but winter conditions and terrain would probably make the actual travel distance closer to 30 miles. Estimated travel time in good conditions, 12-15 hours, Lisa planned. In current conditions with snow and limited visibility, 18-24 hours minimum, probably requiring overnight bivouac. At 10:30 a.m. on February 9, Dr. Lisa Zhang left her 3 patients in the crashed aircraft and began what would become one of the most challenging solo wilderness journeys ever documented. She was attempting to cross 25 miles of Alaskan wilderness in winter conditions to save the lives of people she had already abandoned to make the journey possible. As Lisa walked away from the aircraft, she could hear the wind beginning to pick up again. The weather window that had allowed her to begin the journey was already closing, and she was about to face the full fury of the Alaskan wilderness alone. "No turning back now," Lisa said as she checked her compass bearing and began climbing toward the mountain pass. "The only way out is through." Lisa didn't know that she was about to experience conditions that would test every survival skill she possessed, or that her journey would require her to redefine everything she thought she knew about endurance, determination, and what it means to hold on when holding on seems impossible. Lisa had been traveling for 2 hours when the weather window that had allowed her to begin the journey slammed shut with terrifying suddenness. The moderate snowfall intensified into a full blizzard. Visibility dropped to less than 10 feet, and wind speeds increased to levels that made forward progress nearly impossible. "Weather deteriorating rapidly," Lisa said into her voice recorder, which she was using to document her journey for potential rescue teams. "Visibility near zero. Wind speed approximately 40-50 mph. Considering emergency shelter." Lisa was approximately 3 miles from the crashed aircraft, climbing through dense forest toward the mountain pass that represented the first major obstacle in her route to the mining camp. The terrain was steep and treacherous, even in good condition, and the blizzard was making navigation extremely difficult. Lisa's GPS was functioning, but the device's screen was difficult to read in the blowing snow, and its battery life was limited in the extreme cold. She was relying primarily on compass navigation, taking bearings when visibility allowed and maintaining her general direction when it didn't. Compass bearing 045 degrees, Lisa noted as she checked her direction during a brief clearing. Elevation approximately 3,400 feet, still below tree line, but terrain becoming more exposed. Lisa's winter survival training had emphasized the importance of recognizing when conditions were too dangerous for travel and having the discipline to seek shelter rather than pushing forward into fatal situations. The current blizzard was rapidly approaching those conditions, but Lisa also knew that every hour she spent in emergency shelter was an hour closer to death for her patients back at the aircraft. Maria Santos probably had less than 12 hours to live without surgical intervention. Even a few hours of delay could make the difference between rescue and recovery mission. Patients can't wait for perfect weather, Lisa decided, as she pushed forward through the deepening snow. Have to accept higher risk to maintain timeline for rescue. Lisa's progress slowed dramatically as the storm intensified. Snow was accumulating at rates that made each step require tremendous effort, and the wind was creating drifts that forced her to find alternate routes around impassable areas. What should have been a 2-hour climb to the pass was taking 4 hours and consuming far more energy than Lisa had planned. Energy expenditure higher than calculated, Lisa observed, noting her increasing fatigue and elevated heart rate. Deep snow and wind resistance requiring more calories per mile than anticipated. Lisa's clothing system was performing well in the extreme conditions, but she was beginning to experience the early signs of cold injury in her extremity. Her fingers were becoming numb despite her gloves, and her feet were losing sensation in her boots. She would need to stop periodically to rewarm her extremities or risk frostbite. Core temperature stable, but peripheral circulation compromised. Lisa diagnosed her own condition. Need to implement rewarming protocols to prevent cold injury. At 2:00 p.m., after more than 3 hours of brutal travel through worsening conditions, Lisa reached the crest of the mountain pass. The elevation was approximately 4,200 feet, and she was now above treeline in terrain that offered no protection from the wind and blowing snow. Pass elevation achieved, Lisa reported, though her voice was strained from cold and exertion. Wind speed extreme, visibility 0. Terrain now completely exposed. The view from the pass, when visibility allowed brief glimpses, was both inspiring and terrifying. Lisa could see the valley system she needed to descend, but the route was steep, exposed, and would require careful navigation to avoid cliffs and avalanche-prone slopes. Descent route visible during breaks in weather, Lisa noted. Steep terrain, avalanche risk present, navigation critical. Estimated descent time 3-4 hours in current conditions. Lisa's decision to continue across the pass, rather than seeking shelter, was based on her assessment that the most dangerous part of her journey was the exposed high-elevation terrain. Getting below tree line as quickly as possible would improve her safety and provide better shelter options if conditions continued to deteriorate. Staying on exposed ridge longer than necessary increases risk of hypothermia, or becoming lost, Lisa reasoned. Better to descend quickly to treeline and deal with other challenges in more protected terrain. Lisa's descent from the pass was the most technically challenging part of her journey so far. The slope was steep enough to require careful footing, and the blowing snow made it difficult to see obstacles like rocks, tree wells, or cliff edges that could cause fatal falls. Lisa used her trekking poles like anchors, testing each step carefully before committing her full weight. She also used a technique called deliberate route finding, where she would identify landmarks during brief clearings and navigate between them, rather than trying to maintain a single bearing in zero visibility. Navigation by landmark recognition. Lisa explained her technique. Large boulder at 200 meters, group of trees at 400 meters. Moving from landmark to landmark rather than straight-line navigation. After 2 hours of careful descent, Lisa reached treeline and the relative protection of the forest canopy. The wind was still strong, but the trees provided some shelter from the direct force of the storm. More importantly, Lisa was now in terrain where she could find suitable sites for emergency shelter if conditions became unsurvivable. Treeline reached, elevation approximately 3,000 feet, Lisa reported. Wind reduced, visibility improved slightly. Forest providing protection from worst condition. Lisa's progress through the forested valley was faster than her exposed ridge travel, but still much slower than she had hoped when planning her route. The snow was deep enough that she was sinking to mid-thigh with each step, and fallen trees and dense vegetation forced frequent detours. Snow depth 18-24 inches, increasing with continued precipitation, Lisa observed. Forward progress slowed due to terrain and weather. Timeline for reaching mining camp, extending beyond original estimates. Lisa had been traveling for 8 hours when she reached what she estimated was the halfway point of her journey to the mining camp. Her GPS showed that she had covered approximately 12 miles, though the actual distance traveled was probably closer to 15 miles due to terrain obstacles and route deviations. Halfway point reached, Lisa calculated. Distance remaining approximately 13 miles. At current pace, arrival time tomorrow morning at earliest. Lisa's assessment meant that she would need to spend at least one night in emergency bivouac conditions before reaching help. She began looking for suitable sites for overnight shelter, while she still had enough daylight and energy to construct adequate protection. Seeking bivouac site, Lisa noted as she surveyed the terrain around her. Need wind protection, drainage, materials for shelter construction. Daylight approximately 2 hours remaining. Lisa found a suitable shelter site in a grove of large spruce trees that provided protection from wind and offered materials for shelter construction. The site was on slightly elevated ground that would drain well, and there were enough dead branches and evergreen boughs to construct effective insulation and wind barriers. Shelter site selected, Lisa reported. Beginning construction of overnight bivouac. Weather forecast predicting continued storm through night. Lisa's construction of her emergency shelter required 2 hours of intensive work in deteriorating light and continued blizzard conditions. She used techniques learned in military survival training to create a shelter that would protect her from wind and precipitation while conserving her body heat through the night. Shelter construction complete, Lisa noted as darkness fell. Anticipated overnight low temperature, -15 degrees Fahrenheit. Shelter and sleeping system rated for condition. As Lisa settled into her shelter for what would be the longest night of her life, she was acutely aware that her patients back at the aircraft were probably entering their final hours. Maria Santos was likely unconscious from blood loss. Tom Bradley might have suffered another cardiac arrest. Jake Morrison could be developing fatal brain swelling. Patients probably dying, while I'm bivouacked, Lisa said into her recorder, her voice heavy with the weight of her decision. But traveling in darkness would be suicidal. Have to wait for daylight to continue. Lisa was about to spend 12 hours alone in a snow cave, fighting hypothermia and guilt in equal measure, while knowing that every minute of delay might be the difference between rescue and recovery. For the people she had left behind, Lisa's emergency shelter was a masterpiece of improvised engineering, but it was still just a hollow in the snow with spruce boughs for insulation. Outside, the blizzard raged with winds that shook the trees above her, and temperatures that dropped to dangerous levels as the night progressed. Hour 1 of overnight bivouac. Lisa spoke into her recorder, using the documentation process to maintain focus and monitor her own condition. Shelter holding well, sleeping system keeping core temperature stable. Outside temperature estimated minus 18 degrees Fahrenheit. Lisa's survival strategy for the night was based on maintaining core body temperature while conserving energy for the next day's travel. She had eaten a high-calorie meal before settling into her shelter, and she was wearing all of her insulation layers to minimize heat loss. But Lisa's greatest challenge wasn't physical, it was psychological. As she lay in her shelter, listening to the storm, she was tormented by thoughts of her patients dying alone in the crashed aircraft, while she was safe and warm in her sleeping bag. Maria is probably unconscious from blood loss by now, Lisa said aloud, using her medical knowledge to calculate what was happening to her patients. Tom might have gone into cardiac arrest. Jake could be developing fatal brain swelling, and I'm not there to help them. Lisa understood intellectually that leaving her patients had been the right decision. Staying with them would have meant everyone died when their supplies ran out. But emotionally, abandoning critically injured people went against everything she believed about medical ethics and personal responsibility. A doctor's job is to stay with patients, Lisa said into the darkness of her shelter. Never leave someone who needs medical care. But what if leaving is the only way to get them the care they need? Lisa's internal conflict was compounded by the knowledge that her journey might ultimately be futile. Even if she reached the mining camp, weather conditions might prevent immediate rescue operations. Her patients might die during the hours or days it would take to organize and execute a rescue mission. I might have left them to die for nothing, Lisa admitted to herself. They could be dead already, and I could still die trying to reach help. Everyone dead, and it's my fault for making the wrong choice. Lisa forced herself to focus on positive outcomes and productive thoughts. She reviewed her route for the next day, checked her equipment and supplies, and planned her travel strategy for reaching the mining camp. Mental preparation was as important as physical preparation for survival. Tomorrow's route: continue down valley 8 miles, then climb ridge system 5 miles to reach mining camp, Lisa planned. Estimated travel time 8-10 hours if weather improves, 12-15 hours if conditions remain difficult. Lisa's shelter was effective at blocking wind and retaining heat, but it couldn't eliminate the cold entirely. She found herself shivering periodically as her body fought to maintain core temperature, and she had to use active warming techniques like isometric exercises to generate additional heat. Core temperature maintenance requiring active measures, Lisa noted. Implementing exercise protocols to prevent hypothermia. Lisa also had to manage her water and food intake carefully. Staying hydrated was crucial for preventing hypothermia and maintaining physical performance, but drinking too much would force her to leave her warm shelter to urinate, causing dangerous heat loss. Hydration balance critical, Lisa observed. Need fluids for performance, but exposure for elimination causes heat loss. Timing water intake to minimize exposure. As the night progressed, Lisa became increasingly concerned about the weather conditions outside her shelter. The wind was not diminishing as she had hoped, and the continued snowfall was making travel conditions even more challenging. Storm intensity not decreasing, Lisa reported during her midnight check. Snow accumulation continuing, wind speed still high. Tomorrow's travel conditions may be worse than today's. Lisa faced a difficult decision about when to begin travel the next morning. Starting too early would mean traveling in dangerous pre-dawn conditions, but starting too late would consume daylight she needed for navigation and safety. Dawn at approximately 7:30 a.m. Lisa calculated. Planned to begin travel at 8:00 a.m. to allow for equipment preparation and route assessment. Every hour of delay increases risk to patients. Lisa's worst moments during the night came when she heard sounds outside her shelter that her exhausted mind interpreted as voices calling for help. She knew rationally that she was experiencing auditory hallucinations brought on by stress and isolation, but the psychological impact was devastating. Hearing voices calling for help, Lisa admitted in her recorder, "No, it's psychological, but difficult to ignore. Patients probably dead, and I'm hearing their final calls." Lisa used meditation and breathing techniques to manage her psychological distress and maintain focus on survival priorities. She couldn't afford to let guilt and grief compromise her judgment or physical performance during the critical next phase of her journey. Mental state management crucial for survival, Lisa reminded herself. Cannot let emotional distress interfere with decision-making or physical performance. As dawn approached, Lisa began preparing for what she hoped would be the final day of her solo journey to reach help. She ate a high-energy breakfast, organized her equipment, and conducted a thorough assessment of weather conditions outside her shelter. Dawn breaking. Weather assessment beginning, Lisa reported as she emerged from her shelter to check conditions. Snow depth increased approximately 6 inches overnight. Wind speed reduced but still significant. Visibility improved to 50-75 meters. Lisa's assessment of travel conditions was mixed. The weather had improved enough to make navigation possible, but snow accumulation had made travel more difficult. More importantly, she was now approximately 18 hours behind her original timeline for reaching help. Timeline significantly delayed, Lisa calculated. Patients probably critical or deceased, but rescue still possible if I can reach mining camp and organize immediate response. Lisa broke camp efficiently, packed her gear, and began the final phase of her journey to the mining camp. She was tired from a sleepless night and stressed by worry about her patients, But she was also motivated by the knowledge that she was probably the only hope for rescue remaining. Beginning final approach to mining camp, Lisa announced as she started down the valley. Distance remaining approximately 13 miles. Estimated arrival time 6:00-8:00 p.m. if weather holds. Lisa was about to face the most challenging terrain of her entire journey, a steep ridge climb that would test her physical endurance and mental determination to their absolute limits. But she was also closer to help than she had been since the crash, and for the first time in 36 hours, rescue seemed possible rather than merely hopeful. Lisa's second day of travel began with improved weather conditions, but increasingly difficult terrain. The valley floor was covered with deep, soft snow that made each step exhausting, and the route toward the mining camp required crossing several avalanche-prone slopes that could be triggered by the weight of a single person. Valley travel conditions: snow depth 24-30 inches. Soft and unconsolidated, Lisa reported, as she made steady progress toward the base of the ridge system. High energy expenditure, but forward progress consistent. Lisa's physical condition was beginning to show the effects of her marathon survival journey. She had been traveling for over 24 hours with only brief rest periods, burning calories at a rate that her limited food supplies couldn't sustain. Her body was beginning to consume muscle tissue for energy, and her performance was noticeably declining. Physical condition deteriorating, Lisa assessed objectively. Energy levels low, muscle fatigue increasing, some coordination problems, but still capable of continued travel. Lisa's route up the ridge system toward the mining camp was the most technically challenging part of her journey. The terrain was steep enough to require hand-over-hand climbing in places, and the snow conditions created constant avalanche risk on exposed slopes. Ridge approach beginning, Lisa noted as she started the final climb. Elevation gain required approximately 1,500 feet. Terrain steep and exposed. Avalanche risk significant. Lisa used mountaineering techniques learned during her Denali expeditions to climb safely through the dangerous terrain. She tested each step carefully for stability, avoided slopes with obvious avalanche signs, and used trees and rock outcrops for protection whenever possible. Climbing technique: test each step, use protection points, avoid obvious slide paths. Lisa documented her safety protocols. Progress slow but steady, safety margin maintained. Lisa's most dangerous moment came while crossing a steep slope that she couldn't avoid or bypass. The snow was deep and unstable, and she could feel it shifting beneath her feet as she carefully picked her way across. One wrong step could trigger an avalanche that would bury her alive. Avalanche-prone slope crossing, Lisa said quietly into her recorder. Snow unstable, significant slide potential. Moving quickly but carefully, Lisa made it across the dangerous slope without triggering a slide, but the experience reminded her how close she was to death at every moment of her journey. One mistake, one moment of inattention, one piece of bad luck could end her rescue mission and seal the fate of her patients. Dangerous crossing complete, Lisa reported with relief, reminded that survival margin very thin. Single mistake could be fatal. As Lisa climbed higher up the ridge, she began to see signs of human activity that indicated she was approaching the mining camp. Old snowmobile tracks, marked trees, and even some discarded equipment suggested that people worked in this area regularly. Human activity signs increasing, Lisa observed. Snowmobile tracks, trail markers, equipment caches. Mining camp should be close. Lisa's excitement at approaching help was tempered by her realistic assessment of what would happen when she reached the mining camp. She would need to convince the workers to immediately organize a rescue mission in dangerous weather conditions, coordinate with outside agencies, and somehow get aircraft into the remote crash site. Reaching mining camp, only first step, Lisa reminded herself. Still need to organize rescue, overcome weather obstacles, reach patients before medical conditions become irreversible. Lisa's GPS showed that she was within 2 miles of the mining camp when she encountered the most heartbreaking sight of her entire journey. Fresh snowmobile tracks leading away from the area, indicating that workers might have evacuated due to the storm conditions. Fresh tracks leading away from mining camp, Lisa observed with growing concern. Possible evacuation due to weather. Camp might be empty. Lisa's worst fears seemed to be confirmed when she reached the mining camp and found it apparently deserted. The buildings were locked and shuttered, equipment was covered and secure, and there were no signs of current occupancy. Mining camp appears evacuated, Lisa reported, fighting off despair. Building secured, no personnel visible, no smoke from heating systems. But Lisa's medical training had taught her to look for signs of life, even when death seemed obvious, and she applied the same systematic approach to searching the mining camp. She checked each building methodically, looking for any indication that someone might still be present. Systematic search of all structures, Lisa documented her process, looking for any signs of current occupancy, communication equipment, emergency supplies. Lisa's persistence was rewarded when she found fresh footprints in the snow leading to a small maintenance building that appeared to be occupied. Someone was still at the mining camp, probably a skeleton crew, maintaining essential systems during the storm. Footprints leading to maintenance building, Lisa observed with renewed hope. Recent tracks, building shows signs of occupancy. Someone still here. Lisa knocked on the door of the maintenance building and heard the most wonderful sound she had experienced in 3 days. A human voice responding to her presence. "Who's there?" came a gruff voice from inside the building. "Doctor." Lisa. "Zhang from Anchorage," Lisa called back. "I need help. We have a medical emergency." The door opened to reveal Bill Anderson, the mining camp's maintenance supervisor, who had stayed behind to monitor essential systems during the storm. His expression of surprise and concern was immediate when he saw Lisa's condition and understood what her presence meant. "Jesus, Doc, what are you doing out here?" Bill asked as he pulled Lisa into the warm building. "You look like you've been through hell." "Plane crash," Lisa explained rapidly. 3 people critically injured, 25 miles southwest of here. "I've been traveling for 2 days to get help." Bill's response was immediate and professional. As a longtime Alaskan, he understood that plane crashes in remote areas were life-or-death emergencies that required immediate response regardless of weather conditions. "Plane crash survivors," Bill repeated, reaching for his radio equipment. "How many people? What's their condition? What do you need?" Lisa quickly briefed Bill on the crash, the condition of her patients, and the urgent need for medical evacuation. Bill immediately began coordinating with rescue services, using the mining camp's powerful radio system to contact agencies throughout Alaska. "Alaska Rescue, Alaska Rescue," This is Coldfoot Mining Station, with emergency traffic bill transmitted. We have confirmed plane crash with multiple casualties, requiring immediate medical evacuation. The response from Alaska Rescue Coordination Center was immediate and encouraging. Despite the weather conditions, rescue operations were already being organized based on the aircraft's emergency locator beacon, which had been detected by satellite. Coldfoot Mining, this is Alaska Rescue. We have been tracking emergency beacon from your area. Confirm plane crash location and casualty status. Lisa provided detailed information about the crash location, her patient's medical conditions, and the urgency of the situation. She also offered to guide rescue teams to the crash site, since she was the only person who knew the exact location and route. I can guide the rescue team back to the crash site, Lisa told the rescue coordinator. I know the exact location and the safest route through the terrain. The rescue operation that followed would become one of the most challenging medical evacuations in Alaska's history. But for the first time since the crash, professional help was mobilizing to save her patients. Lisa had completed an epic 25-mile solo journey through the Alaskan wilderness in blizzard conditions, and now she had to hope that her patients had survived long enough for rescue to save them. The Alaska Rescue Coordination Center mobilized with the efficiency of an organization that dealt with life-or-death emergencies daily. Within minutes of Lisa's contact, helicopters were being prepared, medical teams were assembling, and weather forecasters were analyzing conditions for the rescue operation. Weather window opening in approximately 2 hours, reported Chief Rescue Coordinator Sarah Martinez. We can get aircraft into the area, but landing at the crash site will be challenging due to terrain and snow conditions. Lisa was providing detailed information about her patient's conditions and the crash site layout to Dr. James Wilson, the flight surgeon who would lead the medical team. Her information was crucial for determining what equipment and personnel would be needed for the rescue. Patient 1, severe head trauma, unconscious for over 48 hours, probable brain swelling. Lisa briefed the medical team. Patient 2, internal bleeding from abdominal injuries, hypotensive, probably requires immediate surgery. Patient 3, cardiac patient, multiple heart attacks, unstable rhythm. Dr. Wilson's assessment was sobering. 2 of your patients are probably dead or dying, and the 3rd might not survive transport, even if we reach him immediately. This is going to be a recovery operation as much as a rescue. But Lisa refused to accept that her patients were beyond help. She had risked everything to reach the mining camp, and she wasn't going to give up on her patients now that professional rescue was possible. They were alive when I left them 30 hours ago, Lisa insisted. People can survive longer than medical literature suggests if they are determined enough. We have to assume they're still alive until we confirm otherwise. The rescue operation required careful coordination between multiple agencies and aircraft. The primary medical helicopter would carry Lisa and the medical team to the crash site, while a second aircraft would stand by for patient evacuation. Ground teams were also mobilizing in case weather prevented helicopter operations. To Helicopter Operation Chief Martinez explained, medical team in first aircraft, patient evacuation in second, ground support team standing by if weather forces alternative approach. Lisa's role in the rescue was complicated by her own physical condition. She had been traveling for over 30 hours in extreme conditions and was showing signs of exhaustion and dehydration. But she was also the only person who knew the exact crash location and could guide rescuers safely to her patients. Dr. Zhang needs medical evaluation before participating in rescue operations, Dr. Wilson observed. She's clearly exhausted and possibly hypothermic. I'm fine, Lisa protested, though she knew her condition was marginal. I can guide you to the crash site. My patients need me. Lisa's determination overrode medical caution, and she was cleared to accompany the rescue team despite her condition. The flight to the crash site would take approximately 45 minutes, during which Lisa would provide detailed briefings about the terrain, weather conditions, and patient status. Flight time to crash site 45 minutes, the helicopter pilot reported. Weather marginal but flyable. Landing zone will be challenging due to trees and snow. As the rescue helicopter lifted off from the mining camp, Lisa felt a mixture of hope and dread that was almost overwhelming. She was finally returning to her patient with professional help, but she had no idea what they would find when they reached the crashed aircraft. 38 hours since I left them, Lisa calculated, as the helicopter flew toward the crash site. Maria probably bled out within the first 24 hours. Tom might have had a fatal heart attack. Jake could have died from brain swelling. Lisa guided the helicopter pilot to the crash site, using landmarks she had memorized during her solo journey. The aircraft wreckage was barely visible under the snow that had accumulated since the crash, but the emergency locator beacon was still transmitting and helped confirm their location. Crash site confirmed, the pilot reported. Aircraft inverted, partially buried in snow. No signs of life visible from air. The helicopter landing in the small clearing required exceptional skill from the pilot, who had to navigate between trees and set down on uneven terrain covered with deep snow. The rotor wash cleared snow from around the aircraft, revealing the full extent of the crash damage. Landing successful, the pilot announced. Medical team ready for deployment. Lisa was the first person out of the helicopter, running toward the crashed aircraft despite her exhaustion. She called out to her patients as she approached, hoping against hope to hear responses that would indicate they were still alive. Maria, Tom, Jake, Lisa shouted as she reached the aircraft. Can you hear me? Help is here. The silence from inside the aircraft was deafening. Lisa's heart sank as she realized that her worst fears might have been confirmed. She might have completed an epic rescue journey, only to find that her patients had died while she was gone. But when Dr. Wilson and his team entered the aircraft, they found something that defied medical expectation. All 3 patients were still alive, though barely. We have 3 live patients, Dr. Wilson reported to the helicopter. All critical, all requiring immediate evacuation, but all still alive. Jake Morrison was unconscious but breathing, his head injury stabilized by the cold temperatures that had slowed brain swelling. Tom Bradley was conscious but weak, his cardiac condition maintained by the medications Lisa had left with him. Most remarkably, Maria Santos was still alive, despite massive internal bleeding, her condition stabilized by hypothermia that had slowed her metabolism and bleeding rate. The cold saved them, Dr. Wilson explained to Lisa, as the medical team worked to stabilize patients for evacuation. Hypothermia slowed their metabolism enough to keep them alive longer than should have been possible. Lisa's decision to leave her patients had been vindicated in the most dramatic way possible. If she had stayed with them, they all would have died when their supplies ran out. By leaving to get help, she had created the possibility for rescue that was now becoming reality. Patient stable for transport, Dr. Wilson reported after 30 minutes of intensive stabilization work. Ready for evacuation to Anchorage Trauma Center. The helicopter evacuation of 3 critical patients from a remote crash site in challenging weather conditions was a masterpiece of rescue coordination. Each patient was carefully loaded and monitored during the flight to ensure they survived the transport to definitive medical care. All patients loaded, vital signs stable. En route to Anchorage, the medical team reported as the helicopter lifted off from the crash site. Lisa watched the Alaskan wilderness fall away below the helicopter and felt a mixture of exhaustion and triumph that was almost overwhelming. She had made the impossible journey, reached help in time, and saved the lives of patients who had been given up for dead. "We did it," Lisa whispered to herself as Anchorage appeared on the horizon. "We actually did it." The trauma center at Anchorage Regional Hospital was prepared for the incoming casualties from the plane crash, but the medical team was amazed by what they found when the patients arrived. 3 people who should have been dead from their injuries were instead alive and responding to treatment. "This is unprecedented," observed Dr. Patricia Kim, the trauma surgeon who treated Maria Santos. "Internal bleeding this severe should have been fatal within hours, but hypothermia slowed her metabolism enough to keep her alive for over 50 hours. Jake Morrison underwent immediate neurosurgery to relieve pressure on his brain from swelling caused by his head injury. The surgery was successful, and he regained consciousness after 3 days, with no apparent long-term neurological damage. The cold temperatures prevented secondary brain injury that usually develops after severe head trauma," explained Dr. Michael Rodriguez, the neurosurgeon who operated on Jake. "He's incredibly lucky to have survived, with minimal brain damage." Tom Bradley required cardiac catheterization and stent placement to address the coronary artery blockages that had caused his heart attacks. The procedure was successful, and his cardiac function improved dramatically with proper treatment. Mr. Bradley's heart damage was significant, but reversible with appropriate intervention, reported Dr. Lisa Park, the cardiologist who treated him. "He should make a full recovery with proper medication and lifestyle modifications." Lisa herself required medical treatment for exhaustion, dehydration, and mild frostbite to her extremities. But her most serious condition was psychological, the trauma of making life-or-death decisions and completing an epic survival journey under impossible pressure. Dr. Zhang is physically recovering well, but psychologically, she's processing an incredibly traumatic experience, observed Dr. Jennifer Walsh, the psychiatrist assigned to help Lisa deal with the aftermath of her ordeal. "She made decisions that no person should ever have to make, and she's struggling with the weight of that responsibility." The rescue operation attracted international media attention, with journalists fascinated by the story of a doctor who had abandoned her patients to save them. Lisa's epic solo journey through the Alaskan wilderness became a symbol of determination and sacrifice that resonated with people around the world. Dr. Zhang's decision to leave her patients was the hardest choice any medical professional could face, explained Dr. Robert Chen, director of the Alaska Trauma Center. But it was also the only choice that offered any hope of survival for anyone involved. Lisa struggled with the ethical implications of her decision. Long after the physical recovery was complete, she had violated fundamental principles of medical ethics by abandoning patients, even though that abandonment had ultimately saved their lives. "I broke my oath as a doctor," Lisa told Dr. Walsh during one of their counseling sessions. "I left critically injured patients alone to die while I went to save myself." "You left critically injured patients to get help that saved their lives," Dr. Walsh corrected. "There's a difference between abandonment and rescue, even when they look the same from the outside." Lisa's colleagues in the medical community were divided in their assessment of her actions. Some praised her for making a difficult but correct decision under impossible circumstances. Others questioned whether leaving patients could ever be justified. Regardless of the outcome, the medical ethics are complicated, explained Dr. Amanda Foster, Director of Medical Ethics at the University of Alaska. Dr. Zhang was faced with a situation where traditional ethical frameworks don't provide clear guidance, but Lisa's patients had no doubt about the correctness of her decision. All three credited her with saving their lives through her courage and determination to seek help, despite the enormous personal risk. "Dr. Zhang is a hero," said Jake Morrison during a television interview 6 months after the crash. "She risked her own life to save ours. I would be dead if she had stayed with us instead of going for help." Maria Santos was equally emphatic in her praise for Lisa's actions. "She made the hardest decision anyone could make, and she made it to save our lives. I'm alive today because she was brave enough to leave us to get help." Tom Bradley's assessment was perhaps the most moving. "Dr. Zhang showed me what real courage looks like. Not staying safe, but taking risks when other people's lives depend on your actions." Lisa returned to her emergency medicine practice after a 3-month recovery period, but her experience had changed her profoundly. She had learned that medicine sometimes required decisions that went beyond medical textbooks and ethical guidelines. "My crash experience taught me that being a doctor isn't just about following protocols," Lisa reflected during a medical conference presentation about her experience. "Sometimes it's about making impossible choices and living with the consequences." Lisa also became an advocate for improved wilderness medicine training and remote area rescue capabilities. Her experience had highlighted the challenges of providing medical care in Alaska's remote areas and the need for better preparation and resources. Alaska's wilderness doesn't forgive mistakes or inadequate preparation, Lisa told audiences at wilderness medicine conferences. "We need better training, better equipment, and better coordination between medical and rescue services." Lisa's survival story had inspired countless people facing their own impossible decisions. She received letters from doctors, parents, military personnel, and others who credited her example with helping them find courage to make difficult choices. "Your story taught me that sometimes the right choice is the one that feels wrong," wrote one correspondent. "You showed me that courage isn't about avoiding hard decisions. It's about making them anyway." 2 years after the crash, Lisa was invited to speak at the International Wilderness Medicine Conference, where she was recognized not just as a survival expert, but as someone whose experience had advanced understanding of medical ethics in extreme situations. Dr. Zhang's experience challenges us to think beyond traditional ethical frameworks, said Dr. Sarah Martinez, conference director. Her story shows that real-world medical practice sometimes requires decisions that textbooks don't address. Lisa's presentation focused on the lessons her experience offered for anyone facing impossible choices, whether in medicine or other areas of life. When I was faced with the choice between staying with my patients and leaving to get help, I had to decide what do no harm really meant, Lisa told the conference audience. Sometimes preventing harm requires taking actions that feel like causing harm. 5 years after the crash, Lisa had integrated her experience into a new understanding of medical practice and personal responsibility. She had learned that survival, whether physical or ethical, sometimes required choices that defied conventional wisdom. The crash taught me that holding on sometimes means letting go, Lisa often said. I had to let go of my patients to hold on to the possibility of saving them. As we reach the end of Dr. Lisa Zhang's incredible 72-hour survival story, it's crucial to understand that her ordeal represents far more than just an amazing tale of endurance in the Alaskan wilderness. Lisa's journey through the frozen mountains teaches us profound truths about leadership, sacrifice, and what it truly means to hold on when holding on requires you to make choices that go against everything you believe. Lisa's survival was not just about her own life. It was about accepting responsibility for decisions that would determine whether 4 people lived or died. When the aircraft crashed in the wilderness, Lisa became more than a doctor treating patients. She became a leader who had to make strategic decisions with incomplete information and terrible consequences. Lisa's story demonstrates several crucial principles that apply to any situation where impossible choices must be made. First, that leadership sometimes requires decisions that feel morally wrong, but are strategically correct. Lisa's medical training and personal ethics told her that abandoning patients was unthinkable, but her analysis of their survival situation indicated that staying with her patients would result in everyone's death, while leaving them offered the possibility that someone might survive. Sometimes the right choice is the one that feels wrong, Lisa learned during her ordeal. Her decision to leave her patients violated every instinct she had as a doctor, but it was the only decision that offered any hope of rescue. Second, that taking responsibility means accepting the consequences of your decisions, regardless of the outcome. Lisa made her choice to seek help knowing that if she failed to reach rescue, or if rescue arrived too late, she would bear responsibility for her patients' deaths. She was willing to accept that burden, because the alternative, passive acceptance of certain death, was unacceptable. Lisa's willingness to take responsibility for an impossible decision is what separated her from someone who simply gave up when faced with an unsolvable problem. She didn't choose the easy path of staying with her patients and letting fate decide their survival. She chose the hard path of taking action and accepting responsibility for the results. Third, that survival often requires sacrificing immediate comfort for long-term benefit. Lisa's journey through the Alaskan wilderness was brutal, dangerous, and likely to fail. Staying in the aircraft with her patients would have been safer, warmer, and more comfortable in the short term, but it would have been fatal in the long term. Lisa's choice to leave the relative safety and comfort of the aircraft for the dangers of solo winter travel represents the kind of strategic thinking that separates survivors from victims. She was willing to accept immediate hardship and risk to create the possibility of long-term survival. Fourth, that holding on sometimes means letting go. Lisa had to let go of her patients in order to hold on to the possibility of saving them. She had to let go of her medical ethics in order to hold on to her responsibility as a leader. She had to let go of the certainty of staying together in order to hold on to the uncertainty of rescue. This paradox that holding on requires letting go is one of the most difficult concepts for people to understand and accept. But Lisa's experience proves that sometimes the only way to save what you care about is to risk losing it entirely. Lisa's epic journey through 25 miles of Alaskan wilderness in blizzard conditions was a masterpiece of determination and skill, but her physical survival was secondary to her psychological survival. Her ability to live with the consequences of decisions that no person should ever have to make. The hardest part wasn't the physical journey, Lisa often says in her presentations. The hardest part was accepting that sometimes being responsible means making choices that feel irresponsible. Lisa's patients survived not just because of her medical care, but because she was willing to abandon them when abandonment was the only path to rescue. Her decision saved 4 lives by risking 4 lives, proving that sometimes the greatest act of loyalty is the one that looks like betrayal. Lisa's story also demonstrates the importance of preparation and training in extreme situations. Her medical knowledge, wilderness skills, and mountain climbing experience all contributed to her survival and the successful rescue of her patients. But her most important preparation was psychological. Her ability to make decisions under extreme pressure and live with the consequences. You can't prepare for every possible emergency, Lisa explains in her wilderness medicine courses. But you can prepare your mind to function when normal rules don't apply and impossible choices become necessary. Lisa's experience changed not just her own understanding of medical ethics and leadership, but influenced discussion throughout the medical community about the responsibilities of healthcare providers in extreme situations. Dr. Zhang's case has become a standard example in medical ethics courses, explains Dr. Patricia Kim, who now teaches at the University of Alaska Medical School. Her experience shows that real-world medical practice sometimes requires decisions that classroom ethics can't address. But perhaps most importantly, Lisa's story provides a model for anyone facing situations where all choices seem wrong and any decision will cause harm. Her example shows that when faced with impossible choices, the responsible path is to choose the option that offers the best chance of achieving your most important objective, even if that choice violates other principles you hold dear. Lisa's most important objective was saving as many lives as possible. Everything else, medical ethics, personal comfort, social expectations, was secondary to that goal. Her willingness to prioritize her most important objective over all other considerations is what enabled her to make a decision that seemed wrong, but was ultimately right. In our own lives, when we face situations where all choices seem wrong, where any decision will cause harm, where holding on seems to require letting go, we can learn from Lisa's example. We can ask ourselves, what is my most important objective? What choice gives me the best chance of achieving that objective? Am I willing to accept responsibility for the consequences of that choice? Lisa Zhang spent 72 hours in the Alaskan wilderness, proving that sometimes the most caring thing you can do is abandon the people you care about. Her story demonstrates that true leadership isn't about making popular decisions or comfortable choices. It's about accepting responsibility for outcomes and being willing to sacrifice immediate comfort for long-term benefit. Lisa's patients survived because she was willing to risk their lives to save their lives. Her epic journey through the frozen wilderness was successful because she held on to hope when hope required abandoning the people she was trying to save. Her story teaches us that holding on isn't always about staying close to what you're trying to protect. Sometimes holding on means letting go. Sometimes saving lives means risking lives. Sometimes the greatest act of loyalty is the one that looks like betrayal. As we conclude this episode of Hold On, Survival Stories, remember Lisa's example. When you face your own impossible choices, remember that leadership sometimes requires decisions that feel wrong, but are strategically correct. Remember that taking responsibility means accepting consequences regardless of outcome. And remember that sometimes the only way to hold on to what you care about is to risk losing it entirely. Dr. Lisa Zhang held on to her responsibility to save lives by letting go of the people whose lives she was trying to save. Her 72-hour ordeal in the Alaskan wilderness proved that the human spirit is capable of making impossible choices and bearing unbearable responsibility when survival, yours or others, depends on your willingness to act. Thank you for joining us for this episode of Hold On, Survival Stories. Lisa's journey through the frozen wilderness reminds us all that true courage isn't about avoiding difficult decisions. It's about making them anyway, accepting responsibility for the consequences, and holding on to what matters most even when holding on requires letting go. Until next time, remember, when faced with impossible choices, choose the path that offers the best chance of achieving what matters most. Accept responsibility for the consequences, and hold on to hope, even when hope requires sacrificing everything else. Keep holding on.